However, under the Trump administration, you will pay a tariff, and in some cases, a rather large one. Other countries have used tariffs against us for decades, and now it's our turn to start using them against those other countries. On average, the European Union, China, Brazil, India, Mexico, and Canada, have you heard of them? And countless other nations charge us tremendously higher tariffs than we charge them. It's very unfair. India charges us auto tariffs higher than 100%. China's average tariff.
So the inevitable seems to have happened. Donald Trump is levying higher tariffs on not just China, Mexico, and Canada, but also India.
April 2nd, reciprocal tariffs kick in. And whatever they tariff us, other countries, we will tariff them. That's reciprocal, back and forth.
Earlier this week, on the 2nd of March, Trump's decision to impose 20% tariffs on Chinese imports and 25% on imports from Canada and Mexico came into effect. Many other countries, including India, will be hit by higher tariffs next month, one day after April Fools. So a trade war has begun. Canada has retaliated by announcing 25% tariffs on American imports worth $20.7 billion and can increase it to $86.2 billion if the US tariff hikes remain in place for 21 days. Likewise, China has announced additional tariffs of 10 to 15% on various US products. Now, why is Trump imposing tariffs? Well, primarily to reduce trade deficits. As of 2024, the US had its largest trade deficit with China, totaling $300 billion, followed by Mexico with over $200 billion. It has a deficit of approximately $40 billion with India, primarily because of India's high exports of generic drugs, tech talent and services, gems and jewelry, textile, and machine parts to the US. The whole thing is, as many are saying, a complete breakdown of trading rules and principles that have been in place across the world and evolved since the end of World War II. But will it give Donald Trump the desired result? More importantly, what does the tariff salvo mean for India, which has been US's friend and strong trading partner for a long time? Let's find out in this explainer. It's Thursday, the 6th of March. I'm your host Anirban Chaudhary, and this is the Morning Brief. Here's Nilanjan Banik, Professor of Economics and Finance at the School of Management, Mahindra University. Hi Nilanjan, very warm welcome to the Morning Brief.
Thank you very much.
So Nilanjan, give me an economist's sense of what is happening and why.
So basically, we're talking about Trump's tariffs. Now, if you ask a student of economics that whether imposing tariff makes sense or not, anyone will tell you that imposing tariff does not make much sense. The reason being is basically by imposing tariff, you are incentivizing the less efficient producer. In a way, you are trying to protect your less efficient domestic manufacturing industry, which in turn is basically going to increase the price of the items, and therefore the inflation is going to go up. So therefore the cost of capital is going to go up, which in a way is again going to impact your domestic business negatively. And if you are also exporting, let's say these days we are living in a very integrated world where basically your domestic exporters also depends upon some of the components which you have to import. Now, if the price of imports goes up because of tariff, What also that means is the cost of your export is also going to go up, which in a way is also going to make your domestic exporters not that competitive in the world market.
Right. Does India's inclusion in the list come as a surprise to you?
No, it doesn't come to me as a surprise because when Mr. Modi was visiting White House, even in the press brief, Mr. Trump suggested that he is going to impose tariff. And earlier, during his stint when he was in the White House during 2017 onwards, at that point of time, he also famously mentioned India as the tariff king.
Immediately. India, which is the tariff king, they called us and they say, we want to start negotiations immediately. When Bob Lighthizer
So,
said,
from that
what happened?
perspective and the narrative that we are seeing at this point of time, I don't think this announcement of Mr. Trump, who is going to impose tariff on India, which is going to come into effect starting 2nd of April next month, I don't think it's comes as a surprise.
Sure. And which sectors do you think will be impacted? I mean, from a layman's point of view and from sort of the peripheral reading that I've done, it seems that pharma and IT for the big companies, and maybe gems and jewelry, textiles, etc. for the SMEs.
Yeah, you are correct in
Yeah,
the sense.
yeah.
Yeah,
Please.
you're correct in that way because if I look into the major tradable items that India trade with US, which are these items? 19% of our total exports is coming from diamonds and gemstone. 14% of those are because of pharmaceutical and organic chemical. If I'm talking about refined petroleum product, 9% of the total items are we are exporting to the US. Then you have apparel and textiles, which is around 3%, and automotive component around 2%. Now, what I hear from Mr. Trump's saying is he's going to impose tariff on pharmaceutical products. Apart from pharmaceutical products, the other items which Mr. Trump is taunting to impose tariffs are apparel, toys, furniture, footwear, travel goods, what we say the price sensitive exports. Because whenever, again, we are talking about exports, we are talking about two types of export. One is income sensitive exports, which are more technologically embodied, and the other is price sensitive export. Trump is actually imposing tariff on price sensitive exports. Now, fortunately for us, we don't have that much of market share, or we don't export that much amount of toys, furnitures, footwears, or travel goods to the US. If you look into India's major exports item, it's refined petroleum product. And
Hmm.
refined petroleum product is something which is income sensitive. It does not depends upon your whether you have a tariff or not. Because if your economy is growing, irrespective of whether you have a tariff or not, you will need energy, right? So therefore, looking through that lens, I don't think this is going to work or going to impact countries which are exporting income sensitive items. If you just want to see which one of the item in particular among the merchandise commodity which is going to come under the impact of Trump tariff, it's going to be the pharmaceutical product.
You don't think IT services will be impacted
See,
in terms
IT
of,
services basically we are trying to export. So when you are exporting,
yeah.
because our rupee is depreciating against dollar, what it implies is the cost of our export is also going to fall. So how much of that, because typically when we talk about revenue, it's price times quantity. So because of rupee depreciating, on an average you will find rupee depreciate around 4% annually. Now because of that depreciation, how much of that is going to ensure our competitiveness is a matter that we need to examine, because more than the price, what matter for the IT related services is the technology, because what we are seeing, the technology is changing quite rapidly, and it depends upon whether the Indian IT firms, they are having competitive advantage in terms of machine learning or artificial intelligence, or for that matter cloud computing. I think more than the Trump tariffs, these are the factors as to how much the Indian IT firms are able to cope up with the changing technological paradigm that we are seeing. is going to be a more important factor as opposed to the Trump tariff. I have another point to make, which is, let's say that Trump is imposing or targeting this Chinese economy to the extent that the Chinese are now not being able to sell their produce to the US market. And my fear is, because now you will see that the Chinese export are going to get impacted, the price of Chinese exports are going to fall even further. And in the second round, what is going to happen is Chinese exports are now going to get pushed to countries such as India or other parts of Southeast Asia, because now that they are not getting market entry because of Trump imposing tariff not only on Chinese export, but also from where China was rerouting their exportable products, in particular Mexico and Canada. So what we are going to see maybe in the year coming forward is the Chinese export items, their price maybe is going to fall a little further. And that will have an impact on India's trade deficit with China. That may actually go up.
Nilanjan, can you explain this relatability a little more?
Yeah. So basically, what happens is when you are imposing tariff, you are also going to see a repercussion of that act of yours being replicated by your trading partners. Now, when that happens, basically what we are seeing is the trade component is going to fall. Now, if I'm looking into the GDP, what are the five different components of GDP? You have consumption expenditure, investment expenditure, private government expenditure, and you have export and import. Now, out of this five component, export and import getting impacted implies that your GDP level is going to fall. Now, I have actually looked into the data between US and China. US is China's most important trading partner. Now, I have looked into the data between 2009, when President Barack Obama took over as a president. He was in power until 2016. After that, Mr. Trump took over as the president. He was in power up to until December of 2020. And after that, Joe Biden took over as the US president before again Mr. Trump was re-elected this time. Now, interestingly, what I found was, if I take out the trade component between China and US from the Chinese and the US GDP, you will find between the year 2009 and 2023, what has happened is Chinese long term annual GDP data actually fall from 9.01% to 8.62%. On the other hand, if I take out that trade component from the US GDP, that trade component being the US China trade component, then the US GDP, the long term GDP numbers suggest that the growth rate of GDP actually falls from 4.78% to 4.07%. In very simple term, what it implies that if trade were not to happen between US and China, then you will find US economy losing out annually on average 196 billion US dollar. On the contrary, the Chinese economy is going to lose out much lesser, because the size of the Chinese economy is much less compared to the US economy, and the Chinese economy is going to lose out 70 billion US dollar on average per year between 2009 and 2023. The other important piece of information you'll find that if I just look into the period between 2019 and 2016, that was the time when Mr. Barack Obama was in power, you will find on average, the trade deficit between US and China was around 310 billion US dollar. And interestingly, when Trump took over as president in 2017, this 310 billion US dollar, which was annual average trade deficit between US and China, increased to actually 360 billion US dollar. Again, this 360 billion US dollar fell to 325 billion US dollar average. This is again the annual average figure when Mr. Joe Biden took over as the president. So what this number are suggesting is, no matter what you do, you are not going to have a hold on the trade deficit. And interestingly, Mr. Trump is also saying that maybe because of imposing tariff, you're going to see the foreign firms, they are going to come and set up their manufacturing units in US, and that is going to create more employment. That is also not true, because if you look into in the year 2019, US export to China actually supported 1.2 million jobs, Now, because you are going to impose tariff, all these jobs are now going to get lost. Another study is suggesting almost 200,000 people are going to lose jobs because of tariff imposition, something I mentioned earlier. That's what the real data is showing. No matter what Mr. Trump keeps on saying that he's going to make the America great again. But on the contrary, just the opposite is going to happen.
Understood. So let's talk about, global trade structures, especially the WTO. What is being flouted, or what is Trump going against by imposing these differential tariffs?
So this is a very important question you've asked, and I think most of the people does not have sense of how tariff impacts, and under WTO whether you can have a differential tariff structure. So let me give you an example. Let's say that tomorrow Mr. Trump says that he's going to impose a 10% tariff on steel originating from China. Now, under WTO rule, World Trade Organization rule, there is something called most favored nation, MFN clause. What it implies is you cannot treat country differentially, meaning that if Mr. Trump is saying that he's going to impose this 10% tariff on steel originating from China, by MFN clause, it automatically is going to be applicable to all other steel exports originating from any other countries, any other trading partners. So you cannot have a scenario where you're saying that I'm going to impose 10% on Chinese steel. On the other hand, I'm not going to impose any tariff on steel originating from India. Now, there is a way you can actually get out of this, which is basically if you are forming a free trade area, or for that matter more deeper economic integration like economic union and stuff like that. Now, India does not have any free trade agreement with US, nor did China has any free trade agreement with US. So the only way US can actually start implementing this tariff is to ensure that they are coming out of the WTO. Under WTO umbrella you cannot, because if you do, then what is going to happen is India can actually pull US in the WTO court, and US is certainly going to lose out on this aspect of imposing tariff.
Right. And what happens if Trump pulls out of the WTO? Because we certainly can't put it past him. What happens then?
Nothing much, because as I said, that WTO as a institute, as a multilateral organization, uh, it is also kind of because most of the countries in the world now has free trade agreement with their trading partners. Like India has got a free trade agreement with countries in the Middle East. We are trying to sign up various free trade agreements with countries in the European Union. So in that way, it's not going to impact much, even if US pull out of WTO.
How do you see this trade war panning out in the next 6 to 7 months?
See, all these guys are smart guys, so they also know the limited impact of this trade war. So Mr. Trump is a businessman and he's also a bully. So basically, what he's trying to do is through his talk, how much he's going to walk the talk is something that we need to see. But at this point of time, he is firing the first salvo and try to see that whether the trading partners actually follow what he is going to suggest to them. My sense is, taking a signal from this kind of thing, Mr. Trump is going to mellow down within the next few months, because he's going to see that actually he's not making US great again, but if it is going to go the other way around. And maybe we'll see that a softening of this, what we call this hawkish image of Mr. Trump, going forward.
Nilanjan, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
That's it for today. You were listening to this episode on The Morning Brief. It was produced by me, sound designed by Amrit Reggie. A new episode of The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Keep listening. All clips used in this episode belong to their respective owners. Credits are mentioned in the description.